effort or whatever, and he actually sent me up my program. So, but in general, yeah, what's interesting though is my company is working with USAID these days on an employee assistance and resilience, program. We're the prime contractor for it. So I mean, it's something that I'm like, oh, I have some context here. Because
okay, lunch hour is slowly creeping towards 1 o'clock now, so we're going to get started. Will be a panel on the topic of physical danger. It's going to be moderated by Capo and Williams from the Central Asia Working Group. But first, I think we have an announcement.
Hi, everyone. Just in light of the previous panel discussion, I thought you all might be a good group to inform about the upcoming Contentious Conversations lunchtime event. This is a series where we try to raise up issues in the field, and the next one is going to be an ethical focus on how ESCAR relates to working with what we're calling the state, i.e. Department of Defense contracts, military presence on campus, and so forth. So that's February 23rd, 12:15 to 1:15. Bring a lunch if you like. We'll have a few faculty members to help kickstart the conversation, but then it's really a chance for us all to talk about it together.
Okay, so let's get started on the second panel. Our first person is Joseph Idegu. He is a PhD candidate at the University of Strathclyde, I hope I said that right, in the UK, the Faculty of Humanities and Applied Social Sciences. His current research examines conflicts and security issues in the West Africa sub-region. It is a critique of the interwoven conflicts in Liberia and Sierra Leone. Our second presenter is Michael Lodenthal. He is an anarchist organizer, excitedly expectant father, and academic insurgent based in Washington, D.C. Michael has been involved in a number of anti-authoritarian and anti-capitalist projects in the U.S. and abroad, conducting long-term research projects and working in solidarity with those hoping to foment social protests. Such sites have included post-Katrina New Orleans, Zapatista-controlled Mexico, Rastafarian communities in Kingston, Jamaica, punk and animal liberation movements in Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador, and Colombia, direct action environmental networks in Scotland and England, and communities resisting military presence throughout the occupied Palestinian territories. In 2010, he completed a master's degree in terrorism studies at the Center for the Study of Terrorism and Political Violence at the University of St. Andrews. For the past 2 years, he has taught terrorism and political violence at Georgetown University and is currently a doctoral fellow at the School for Conflict Analysis and Resolution at George Mason University. So, Joseph, if you'd like to start.
All right, my name is Joseph. I don't need to say that anymore. I'm just going to sit here and tell my story. I don't have any slide. Just a story, and I'm sure everybody's aware of that.
Can you closer to the microphone?
Right. So I'm going to be talking about the risk of physical harm to researchers. Here in this paper, I'm just going to be looking at junior researchers and PhD students like myself. I spent 3 months in Liberia and Sierra Leone, 1.5 months each. My research is basically to look at the nature of conflict in Liberia and Sierra Leone. I'm comparing those both conflicts. I'm looking at the issue of ethnicity, natural resources issues, and border security. I'm looking at how these 3 issues join together to inflame and escalate the conflict. People have written about the conflict in terms of other causes, lack of democracy, long history of military rule, corruption, maladministration, and the rest of them. And a lot of people have said, oh, it's a natural resource issue, diamond and the rest of them. Some say ethnicity, but I'm looking at to what extent are these 3 issues joined together be a factor in escalating the conflict. My experience was quite, I didn't have any much trouble traveling to Liberia and Sierra Leone because I'm African, you can see that. And I grew up in Africa also, so getting around wouldn't be a problem compared to my white colleague. But because I went alone and without much experience, I've only been involved in research to Rwanda and to Ghana, and that was not enough experience for me was a big thing for me. What I'm going to look at is I'm going to look at the work of Bloch and others in the UK. Their belief is that in their work, they say that those who are mostly affected by physical harm when they're doing their research are junior researchers and PhD students. They were saying that the university itself exposed them to a lot of risk by not providing them with needed infrastructure. There's too much emphasis laid on the issue of filling the ethic forms and then code of conduct guidelines and all that without really giving them the kind of training that is needed. And I'm going to look on that. And my argument is going to be based on, number one, that we have been let down, as the PhD student have been let down by the university. And secondly, that research, we ourselves, we do not have the kind of experience needed to be on the field. We lack knowledge, we don't prepare adequately, so the blame should also come to us too for not being able to do what we're supposed to do. And then the risk of harm to, physical harm to junior researchers are more prevalent in less developed societies like Liberia, Sierra Leone, Rwanda, more than to other developed societies where they are already established structure for researchers and you have support. If I'll do my research in Scotland, for example, in Glasgow, of course I'll be able to, I know there are already structures in place for me. I know where to go, I know where not to go. I'm more familiar with the terrain, and also other academic institutions will help me out in whatever I'm going to do. But basically, these my three arguments is because I've looked at it all and I found out, well, if there are going to be any changes, there need to be change institutionally in terms of whatever documents you have in the university that regards ethic form, what you're going to do, what you're not going to do, the kind of supervision you get from your supervisor, which is very necessary, because most of our supervisors have been laid out by this system, not giving them the adequate not providing them this kind of structure or the kind of background to be able to give you the kind of supervision you really need. While I was preparing for fieldwork, what I did was, first of all, in the first few months, I tried as much as possible to read as many literatures as possible regarding what I was going to do. I'll try to understand the dynamic of the conflict by looking at other researchers who have done similar things I'm going to do. I also try to establish contact with organizations who, some of them non-governmental, who have vested interest in these countries, in Liberia and Sierra Leone, like Global Witness. Global Witness is an international organization that are always interested. Anywhere you have conflict that has to do with natural resources, they're always there. Also, I contacted other researchers from other universities who I'm sure have more experience than me. And also, I started attending conferences and presenting papers where people are talking about the kind of research I'm going out for. Although some of them are not directly related to conflict, some of them were about youths after conflict and other post-conflict issues. So this really gave me, a helping hand in what I'm going to do. Well, how do we expose ourselves to risk? We junior researchers, we do also expose ourselves to most of this risk. Number one is our poor preparation and the lack of knowledge. You find out that we are too lazy to read. We're also too lazy to ask questions. Sometimes when they tell us there are conferences here and there that will help us, even when the supervisors gives us literatures, we say, oh, we can do it. I, for one, was so confident because I was going to an African country that is closer to my country of origin, so I thought I know it all. And that has an impact on what I do. Also, we lack an understanding of the imminent risk which we're going to face on the field work. This is because although Liberia and Sierra Leone were post-conflict societies, but we also know that they're still they're not totally safe, and the possibility of exposing yourself to risk is also still there. Also, we lack an understanding of the country and the culture we're going into. It's either because we do not have access to some of the literatures, or we do not have access to the kind of information that is needed for us to read about those countries and about the culture. And also, there is improper planning by the researcher themselves. We don't put planning, but we just think you can garbage in and garbage out, just like we do with the computer. You don't plan, you don't look at the kind of resources you need, You don't look at the weather during the time you're going for your research. You don't care to make adequate contact with people on the ground, with local leaders, international agencies, community leaders, or even, you don't even know who you're going to interview sometimes. It's true you put up a big document saying you're going to see this person, you're going to see that person, but sometimes you do not have access. You don't even know the road, you don't know the map and all that. So these are some of the risks which we ourselves as researchers do expose ourselves into. While I was in Liberia, especially, it was a two-conflict analysis I was looking at. I was looking at two conflicts at the same time. It is dangerous researching these countries at that time because, one, the causes of those conflicts were many, they were multiple. And the wars were not just one. The wars in Liberia happened about 2 or 3 times within a space of 10 years, the same thing in Sierra Leone. And at that period, people thought the war was over. Yeah, it's over. But at the same time, there's this rumor that every day that there are still rebels still planning to attack Liberia or attack Sierra Leone from the jungle. They have very large borders, insecure borders, which some people don't even between Liberia and Sierra Leone, they're not sure where one border stops and where the other ends. And also, conflict is still unresolved till today, although they are all both undergoing a certain level of democratic dispensation under the watchful eye of the United Nations. But yet, the issues that cause this conflict are still not been totally resolved. I would say they are just sitting on a fragile democracy as it is now. Also, you find out that both countries lack institutional structures for researchers like me, who is not experienced. The universities, you can't even make contact with universities from my own university. I couldn't phone anybody, and there's no help anywhere. It's as if I'm going. My university has not planned anything down for me. I don't know anybody. The only people I know are people I'm able to contact myself. The university never helped me out in contacting anybody. But when I arrived in Liberia, the first challenge was at the airport. I had my cameras, I had my recorders, I had my phones, 2 phones, and all that in my hand luggage. Now, I'd made arrangement with my contact to come and pick me from the airport and clear me from the customs and immigration, but they didn't arrive on time. So once I was searched, they found out in my bag I have cameras, receivers, different kind of equipment, laptops, and I had 2 laptops. So I was just shoved aside into an angle and into an office, and I was asked what my missions were. I explained what I came to do, but they weren't listening. They took me into an office and stood me there for about 2 hours. And the junior military men were telling me I should bail myself out, which I didn't know what they meant by bailing myself out. And I didn't know they were asking me to give money. But while all that was going on, and luckily for me, one of my contacts came to the airport to pick me up, and that was how I was able to be free from that. Because if that has gone on for too long, I didn't know where it was going to end. Also, in Freetown and in Sierra Leone, and also in Monrovia and Liberia, there's high level of employment among the youth. And there's cases of armed robbery, political violence. And I happen to have traveled at a time when they were getting ready for the next election. So there's the possibility of pre-election violence. There's also the possibility of post-election violence. But at that particular time, they were campaigning, political parties were being formed, new ones were being formed, old ones were looking for ways of making sure they get the best out of the election. Also, I had to also go out to look for those to interview. Who am I interviewing? I have to interview government officials, present and retired, military officials, present and retired. I also look for the international agencies who were involved in the conflict. I was at the UN Special Court trying the perpetrators of the atrocities. But at the same time, the UN Special Court has an arm in Sierra Leone called the Outreach Program, where the Special Court was not just going out, was not just trying the perpetrators, they were also going out to educate the people, go to the communities to interview them, ask them their experiences, and also give them feedback on what they were doing. So I had to also go with them to this program. When we went in Baytown, which is a diamond district in Baytown, the road was quite treacherous, very treacherous road. Although after carrying out the internal risk assessment by the UN for me to follow the van, On the way, we only had about 2 soldiers who were following us to these communities. And even as we were traveling, it was about a 3-hour journey from Baytown. As we were traveling, we were hearing news that there are rebels on the way in some part of the places we were going to. So we have to divert and follow a more treacherous road, which was quite risky, which of course the university during my ethics form, I never said, they told me, oh, promise us you're not going to go to high-risk areas, don't go outside Liberia, outside Freetown. But how can I get the kind of information I need if I don't go with these guys to this outreach program? That's the only way I would have the feel. That's the only way I could be involved. That's the only way I could get the kind of interview I needed. Although they are self-imposed risk, but these are just the kind of risk we can go through. The journey across the borders. While I was traveling from Liberia, from Sierra Leone to Liberia, I had to go through Canada because there was no direct flight from Liberia to Sierra Leone. If I have to fly, I have to fly back to Ghana, and Ghana another flight to Morovia. I don't have that kind of finance, and I wasn't prepared for that kind of trip, so I had to go through the borders. And then again, if my research is going to be looking at border issues, how will I not go through these borders to see what happens? So I took a public transport, in a rickety, public transport carrying traders from Kenema through to Liberia. It was a treacherous journey, and it has to be by night because during the day there was no passengers on that day, and the only vehicle that was going with traders who were carrying all sorts of goods, and the only way they can go through the borders easily was to travel by night, so they would pay less, and I had to go in this type of vehicle. The vehicle broke down on the way about 3 times. It was raining, it was muddy. We had to come out to push the vehicle. We stand the risk of being robbed by armed robbers. If it is true that there are still rebels everywhere across the borders, well, we'll have been exposed to that. Also, I had to come out without my rain boots, without anything, to be pushing the vehicle when it broke down on the way. And finally, you have to pay your way through the borders no matter the kind of identity you are carrying. I'm from West Africa. I was carrying an ECOWAS passport, which means I'm supposed to travel through the borders without paying a dime. But I had to pay, despite my passport. It was not working. I had a letter from the director of border services in Liberia, in Sierra Leone, and that should take me through the Sierra Leonean border without a border. But no, it never did. I was delayed for several hours. I was asked questions I shouldn't be asked. Some even said I should give them my mini laptop since I have 2, as a way of passing through the border. And some said, oh, I have a beautiful camera, I can always buy another one to come from the UK. I said, this is the only camera I have to use here, I can't give this camera to you. These are the kind of things you go through when you're going through these borders. And also when I got to, when I was going out with the UN, at one of the programs we had, one of the outreach programs, we were speaking to some of the victims of the war, and there was a lady who came out to say she was raped, her grandmother and her daughter in the same room at the same time by about 14-year-old kids, and then there was another little girl that was amputated when she was just 3 months old. All this has an impact on me as a person. And also during my program with the Red Cross and with some international agencies, there are some villages and towns that were specially built for those who were victims of the war, who could not walk, some who have been amputated, some who need wheelchair. And this had a lot of impact on me too. Although you can call them psychological impact, but also these things also have a kind of a physical impact on you as a person. The kind of risk I exposed myself to, like I was saying, was when I traveled with these guys to Kalahun for this program. I also stayed out at night, very late at night. That was the only way I could meet some of the rebel leaders. You cannot see them during the daytime. They are still afraid for their own life too. So sometimes I have to travel to villages outside Freetown, outside Morovia, to see some of these rebels. Also, I also put myself through a lot of risk also by looking out for some of the child soldiers who also have good information for me as a source of people I'm going to interview. And I use all sort of transportation to move around in Liberia and Sierra Leone. I moved around with bikes. I moved about in public taxis, which I shouldn't do, putting myself to risk But I don't have my own car, and these are the only way I could meet all these people. If you go somewhere by private taxis, people will pick you out easily, so this is why I have to do that. Also, the university, what can they do? The university as an institution has failed to assist me in several ways. For instance, there's supposed to be what we call post-fieldwork counseling. I didn't get that from the university. I think that is very necessary for them to put in place, rather than telling me to pick out an ethic form. And also, post-conflict, post-research fieldwork counseling is also necessary. I need to be counseled before going. I need to be counseled after I'm back. University risk assessment forms were not specifically tailored for the need of the kind of research I was doing. I think this is another way the university can also add that in. Not just filling out an ethics form, but specifically tailored pre-fieldwork kind of incentives that are tailored to what the kind of research I'm doing, because our research are different from the other person's research. Also, there's a standardized form which they gave to me to fill. Of course, if I can tell them a beautiful story, they will let me go. I filled one online. After telling them that story, I was allowed to go. The university ethics committee only spoke to me for about 10 minutes, and that's all they did. Pre-fieldwork training is very necessary, either as a department or as a faculty. There should be a specific pre-fieldwork training. Other organizations do this. The media organization, for instance, they do that. International organizations also do that, but it is lacking here in most universities. There's also post-fieldwork appraisal is non-existent. Nobody wants to come back. When you come back, to sit you down for them to get an appraisal. I only had that with my supervisor. I think even the university ethics committee should also do that. They would give me kind of post-appraisal. And also, the researcher is very inexperienced, and we don't have what it takes, and especially when you're going alone or as an individual. And there need to be changes in the way and manner that the university ethics committee carry out this work. This institution should invest more resources in preparing us financially and otherwise, and then by arming the researcher with necessary tools they need. They should also ensure that the necessary information are given and the necessary contact. There should be what I call an institutional contact. For instance, if my supervisor knows somebody at the University of Liberia or University of Sierra Leone, that's the Furabe College, it will give me more insight into what I'm doing. But my supervisor knows nobody or no contact. My university has not even heard of some part of Sierra Leone before. So if they can have what I can call institutional contact, like where they can make contact with the university in Liberia, knowing that I'm coming for my research, or with other international organizations, maybe governmental or non-governmental. Also, after the field work, when I come back, there should be a database in every university for fieldwork experience, where I will come back with my fieldwork experience, whatever I did in my fieldwork, the kind of risk I faced, how I went about it. There should be a database in the university, so that if somebody else is going on fieldwork, he can look back and say, I'll go here. There should be researchers who have gone to where I've been, or who have done similar researches, either in my university or other universities that I can contact. Through, I don't know how they're going to set up that kind of a database, but I know it's possible. Also, when you come back from your fieldwork, before you go to your fieldwork, your mentor, you should not only be mentored by your university. If my supervisor do not have the kind of experience or the kind of knowledge about where I'm researching on, they should be able to look for a mentor outside your institution who has carried out similar research, fieldwork in similar places that they can tell you to go to, who will mentor you before you embark on the fieldwork. I wouldn't have much time. I just have to paraphrase through my story. I didn't have time to even go through all my stories, but that was my experience in Liberia and Sierra Leone. Thank you.
Hello. Can everyone hear me in the back? Yeah. So I was put on the on the physical security panel, though, and I guess when I originally put out this proposal, maybe it was more themed to physical security. Nonetheless, what I'm going to be looking at is kind of a dual approach, one with physical security, but also with more of the ethical, informed consent, and confidentiality agreements that we kind of discussed in the last panel, so forgive the kind of misplacement for this. I just first want to say that I 100% agree with the comments that were made in reference to those on the previous panel. I had originally considered writing a bit about so-called conflict tourism, the gawking and the huddled masses yearning for freedom that we may or may not write about. And I decided not to, but I was really glad that that was raised, the non-exploitative nature of consent and whatnot. And at the risk of further isolating myself academically, as I've done kind of for a bit, I'm going to present some things which I think are relatively controversial in a more editorial fashion. So excuse me for that. So this is the outline of what I'm going to go through. I'm going to just show the abstract that I had so people can see the idea, at least initially. And then I'm going to look at two broad areas of research. One is the Animal Liberation Front research I did in the UK, looking at confidentiality and the risks, the political and legal risks associated with that. And then looking at researching armed Palestinian groups, the research I did in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. And then look at some kind of, again, more, what I would argue are editorialized conclusions about what we should or should not be doing. Interwoven through this, I'm going to look at the role of so-called activist academics. This is not a term that I created, but a term that people are probably familiar with, and how that's navigated and what that means for people, A, being isolated by their universities, but also negotiating academic credibility. Okay. So, I mean, I put this up because this is what I intended to write on. Investigating respondents actively engaged in criminality presents challenging dilemmas to researchers attempting to gain respondent trust and simultaneously avoiding repressive state security forces. In this discussion, I'll examine two venues in which this difficult navigation surfaced: ethnographically investigating Palestinian armed fighters and interviewing clandestine Animal Liberation Front activists. In both situations, respondents sought to remain underground while simultaneously providing rich analytical data. While the Palestinian fieldwork involved incidents of direct violence with military, police, and intelligence forces, including by eventual deportation, complexities emerged when Israeli terrorist amnesty policies changed the state's recognition of respondents, allowing yesterday's terrorists to become tomorrow's civil servant. For the UK, the challenge was different, as international efforts to produce arrests within the ALF network has forced numerous academics engaged in such inquiries to appear on grand juries or face jail time. These two research projects have presented divergent yet intersectional concerns regarding not only the safety of the researcher but also the respondent. So that is what I'm speaking of, but certainly less to do with safety, which I'm kind of glad was just touched on by the previous panelist. And I guess as a caveat, I can speak to safety, and I hope in the discussion we do this. In my research in the West Bank, I received 2 gunshot wounds and a long detention. So we can chat about that. We can chat about not stepping over the wires that go across the sewer lines, because people tell you they might explode, and the things that we do if we work in conflict zones. But it won't be the focus on what we Okay, so the key questions I want to look at is, one, what is the role of the researcher in protecting respondent anonymity, again, in a very broad sense? And 2, to what degree one can oppose state repression whilst remaining academically viable? And this is something I'm also excited about, the intro that Ted raised about the upcoming talk about the integration of ESCAR and the Department of Defense and things like that, something that I find to be very interesting. And again, the 2 broad venues I'm going to look at, one is the Academic Review Board and federal grand juries, based on research I did in St. Andrews, and zones of asymmetric armed conflict, which I'm going to look at specifically Nablus, which is a Palestinian city in the north. St. Andrews, people don't know, it's a very conservative university, central eastern Scotland, very old, prides itself on terrorism research. I did my research at the Center for the Study of Terrorism and Political Violence. It's, again, very conservative, tends to be state-centric, security-focused, how to combat terrorism. That's its broad outlook. I didn't know this going there. I went there for the conflict analysis program, had some issues with its state-centricness, and transferred into terrorism studies. This is a picture of St. Andrews. It's very pretty. This is the dorm where the prince studied. This is a side note. So to give people a background, 2 minutes on the people I'm looking at. The Animal Liberation Front is the group that I was looking at broadly. The Animal Liberation Front is a group that's been around since the early 70s. They operate globally. They've been responsible for around 30,000 incidents of political violence since the 1970s. The FBI calls them the #1 domestic terrorism threat. Whether or not that's true is up for debate. But what they do is there are clandestine, networked cell groups that engage in a variety of property destruction. Arson is what they're most known for, but also more commonly sabotage, vandalism, criminal mischief, et cetera, et cetera. So these are the common kind of images. You're looking at sheep that are taken from a factory farm by, again, clandestine actors and then released into the wild or put into caring homes. On the right is the Cobble West horse slaughter ranch in Redmond, Oregon, which was burned down in the late 90s because people found it detestable that the US government was capturing wild Mustangs, butchering them, and selling meat to France to feed to dogs. And the bottom picture is something that happened a few weeks ago, which is the arson of 14 trucks at the Harris Ranch. I don't remember where in California, but in California, which was a ranch which provided feedlots to factory farms. Again, someone went in, just to provide context to a particular example, the one on the bottom, someone comes in at night, they spray accelerant, they light a large fire, and they destroy, I think the estimate was $7 or $8 million worth of trucks. These groups cause a huge amount of damage, but haven't yet caused any death or injury to life. These are the groups I'm looking at. Obviously, you can understand why the government would want to make some arrests in this. So, what I was specifically looking at is the Animal Liberation Front in the United Kingdom. Again, I was based in Scotland. What I did is a statistical analysis of 27,000 incidents of what the government's calling ecoterrorism. Okay, so these are, again, range from writing, Huntington Life Sciences kills puppies on the side of a truck to sending nail bombs in the mail. Again, both ends of this extreme. And not all of these are claimed by the Animal Liberation Front, but all these are claimed under the broad venue of ecoterrorism, so I'm looking at the differences. I created a searchable database using SPSS of every single incident I could find, triangulated through government resources, activist-centric, self-reporting, communique sites, and any other source I could find. That has obvious applications for law enforcement, which we're going to chat about in a sec. Actually, I'll take that time to do that now. One of the issues I had is making this information available and making this information useful for the political point and the research point I was making, while not making the raw data available to law enforcement. This was big. I didn't want a year's worth of coding, and people have done database work. It's arduous and awful. I didn't want that effort to be used by Scotland Yard or the United States FBI to further criminalize some of these groups or to make arrests. That was not my intention, though it obviously has that application. The second part is what I did ethnographies, and this is, again, which gets into the scarier part for the state. Ethnographies of underground activists. So these are people who have committed or claim to have committed or maybe have committed crimes, including the ones I described, as well as above ground support groups. These are prisoner support groups typically, and former prisoners, people who have served time for crimes they are known to have committed. Okay. So this is what I did. This is about a year of research. There's two big concerns here. One is the protection of the respondent. This is, again, these kind of dualities. The protection of the respondent versus the regimentation of the institution. Okay. So, for instance, I was leveraged, what was leveraged to me was more red tape and more bureaucracy with me not being able to advance in my studies. If you want to do this, we're going to slow you down this way. If you want to do this, we're going to make you jump through these hoops. We're all familiar with these. But the second concern, and I would argue is more important, is accessing the data for academic certification, in my sense, passing my dissertation, or what's called dissertation in Scotland, to get my master's. And two, the ownership of that data for its other uses. The issue that I had, not to slander or libel, whatever the spoken one is, the people I worked with or under, once I finished my IRB approval, it was approved, I moved down the process, I conducted my research, I did my respondent interviews, I gave them the excerpts of the data that were relevant to make sure I'm not making this up. I was told by my faculty advisor that they needed access to unedited transcripts. They needed to hear audio transcripts, they needed to compare those to written transcripts, and that those transcripts needed to be retained by the university to make sure that I wasn't A, making it up, or B, that respondents weren't reporting criminality to me. This was obviously a problem, not only because it put the people I had interviewed in jeopardy, and I told them that I wouldn't be doing that, but also because it was completely counter to my intention, as well as the research design. The research design was approved. The research design included anonymity. The research design included the fact that I was going to give them edited transcripts. yeah, respondent speaks for 4 hours, 20 minutes of that's probably relevant to the exact questions they're going to be speaking on. The other part, some of it's not relevant. It's very interesting. It informs my understanding of the movement broadly, but it's not particularly relevant. The story about them going and looking at that slaughterhouse at night, which I said, please don't tell me these things, nonetheless, when they said these things, is not relevant to my dissertation. My dissertation was not about what crimes these people had committed. My dissertation was about how these activists saw themselves on a continuum of political violence. So once I completed these interviews that were anonymized, that had the context taken out, that the cities taken out, the names taken out, et cetera, and wrote it up and presented my dissertation to my committee, and my committee, not my committee, but this one particular person who was the head of my department said, great, we're going to fail you unless you give us unedited transcripts. I was in a bit of a bind. And to make a long story short, I argued for a very long time and was eventually allowed to proceed. So what I want to look at, is there a precedent to fear the coerced disclosure of respondents doing this sort of work? This poster was made in reference to the incident I'm going to talk about in a second. But the rhetorical answer is, well, yeah, or else I wouldn't be doing this. So the big issue is federal grand juries in the United States. And so this is the first example that I can find. In 1993, Rick Scarce, who's a professor of sociology at Skidmore, is indicted by a federal grand jury because he is said to have knowledge relating to a break-in at a vivisection laboratory. He refuses to testify. He argued that academic confidentiality and agreements related to his research protected his respondents, because they do, and that's what their intention is. He cited the American Sociological Association's Code of Ethics, which is what he's based on, and he was sentenced to 5 months in prison for contempt of court. This is what happens in federal grand juries. For people who are unaware, grand juries in 30 seconds is you're coerced to provide testimony of something you have knowledge of. You are denied your Fifth Amendment protections. The point is actually, in a sense, to provide evidence of self-incrimination. So you have no Fifth Amendment protections. You have no attorney. Yes, you can stop the proceedings, exit the room, and speak to someone, but you're not able to turn to the side and say, lawyer and friend, can I answer this question? Okay? You were coerced to provide testimony or face contempt of court. Rick, who was a prominent, not a prominent author, but an author on these issues, refused, and we see what happened. More recently, a few years ago in 2009, Scott Demuth, who's the gentleman pictured at the top, who was a grad student at the University of Minnesota, was indicted. The federal grand jury demanded that he name activists he interviewed for his graduate work. This sounds quite similar to what happened with me. He was said to have knowledge of a 2004 Animal Liberation Front raid at the University of Iowa that occurred when Scott was, I believe, 16 years old. So again, respondent age issues aside, he's being asked about things that occurred even before the age of majority. He refused as well. He cited confidentiality agreements made with his respondents, and he was sentenced to 6 months in prison, which he served. This example is a little bit trickier because the government, after pressing the contempt of court charges, says, well, even if it's not contempt of court charges, we think you're also guilty of violating what's known as the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act, which makes it a terrorism offense to disrupt animal enterprises because of these movements. And my favorite quote from this, which is in quotes here, the assistant U.S. state attorney said, quote, defendant's writings, literature, and conduct suggest that he is an anarchist and associated with the Animal Liberation Front movement, therefore he is a domestic terrorist. This goes to the larger conversation of criminalization of dissent, which is the larger theme I'm looking at in this presentation, but is not uncommon. His advisor, David Pello, who was a sociologist at the University of Minnesota, was also threatened but not indicted by the FBI, demanding the name of the respondents that Demuth was using. They said, well, okay, if your student won't tell us, maybe you'll tell us. And he also refused. So, go ahead. Okay. Moving forward to the idea of activist academics, and this is the first time I've used a PowerPoint animation, but, oh yeah. So these are a few examples. These are widely known of people who position themselves as activist academics, whatever that tends to mean. Ignacio, who was denied tenure after he took a stance against Novartis, which is a biotech company. He felt that Novartis did some bad things, it doesn't really matter what, but he was denied tenure after kind of being one of the wedges that severed this contractual relationship between Novartis and his university. The more famous examples were Churchill. It's a much muddier example. People may remember this. After 9/11, he wrote a book, Chickens Coming Home to Roost, this is part of the title, but he argued that victims of 9/11 attacks constituted technocrats in U.S. capitalism, called them little Eichmanns, people got very angry. Certainly his comments were not taken very well. After he was brought to attention because of this, there was a methods investigation done. There was a board assembled to investigate his research methods. he was found that his methods used plagiarism and a couple other things, and he was fired. There was a legal appeal. He was found to be wrongly fired. The conclusion was something to the degree of, if he hadn't have made, and again, this is not my finding, but if he had not made these 9/11 comments, that he never would have been investigated, and nevertheless, the evidence that got him fired shouldn't have been grounds for firing anyway. Okay? And the last example, and this is a really super protracted and bizarre one, is between the man on the left and the man on the right, left and right, yeah. Alan Dershowitz and Norman Finkelstein, who both wrote the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Norman Finkelstein writes a book, Alan Dershowitz writes a book, Norman Finkelstein writes a book opposing his book, and they go back and forth for a couple books now. One of the interesting parts here is that this has led to Finkelstein's academic isolation. Whether or not he has legit research is I'm putting aside for a second, but the pressure put on him by Alan Dershowitz and Harvard Law has to be considered as part of the thing that led to Finkelstein being denied tenure, I would argue. Moving closer to what I'm doing, we're looking at academic inquiry by activists. These are activists doing direct academic inquiry. These are some publications as examples written by spokespeople for radical movements, and they've written books about them. I'm going to proceed a little bit faster because I'm going a little slow. But these people work to contextualize these movements and should be seen as that. They should be seen as academics. They are in an institution, they go through peer review, and the same thing we all go through, despite the fact their findings may be detestable to people. Writing on contemporary actors provides its own kind of set of interestingness. Without the luxury of historical insight, our conclusions and observations could be incomplete. We don't know if these things are right because it happened yesterday. We don't know if the intention of this movement is right because it just happened. Social networking, real-time criticism leads to these rapid knee-jerk reactions. I add this slide in while I was sitting in the back because yesterday I received a series of emails that someone had forwarded me from Facebook, which I don't use, that people were planning to physically assault me at a conference I'm giving on Sunday because of comments I made 2 months ago at another conference. They said that I defamed this movement, and it's a long story, but I put a pie here because there was a reference to people attacking me with pies. And like, I'm not dealing with that in my own way, but that happened because, again, this knee-jerk social networking. Someone's like, oh, he said this, and they post it on Facebook, and people like it, and it spirals out of control. And I think that presents particular challenges when people can do this quite rapidly. Moving on to the kind of latter part in my last 3 minutes. Nablus city, Palestinian West Bank in the north, very large, known for being, quote, a factory of suicide bombers by Israeli security forces. I worked in and out of Nablus for 4 years, but did ethnographies in about a year. I did 2 different kinds of work. I worked there as an academic and I worked there as an activist. The roles are kind of outlined here, both of which occurred in these closed military zones. So I'm doing participant observation, right? I'm documenting things. I'm doing formal interviews, people signing things, but also I'm doing, as we all know, observational work. Okay. As an activist, I'm training volunteers. I'm training them how not to get killed. I'm training them how to be effective. I'm doing a large range of things. Okay. What's risky about this? Well, there's a lot of things that are risky about this. There's proximity to military activity, right? So there's invasions, there's crowd control, i.e. demonstrations. I'm engaging these. I'm engaging in, and again, this is the blurred line. I'm engaging in some as an activist, engaging in some sitting back, recording, taking notes. One is that you have a proximity to armed people. I remember one morning walking very early, about 5 in the morning, which was in retrospect dumb, to a site to interview someone, not realizing that at 5 in the morning in the Palestinian West Bank, there still are armed sentries who are watching for invasions. That's like the tail end of invasion watch time. So you have guys with guns who are looking for white-skinned people, non-Palestinian looking people. I certainly could be an Israeli soldier. I'm the right age. I could be an Israeli soldier, I guess. So I come around the corner, the guy pulls a gun on me, et cetera, et cetera. I quickly, in anglicized Arabic, say, please don't shoot me, I'm a foreigner. And he says, oh, you obviously don't have an Israeli accent. And he lets me pass. We have tons of activities. We have risks. Like I said, the work I did end up in a couple pretty severe injuries with gunfire, as well as my eventual arrest, 18-hour interrogation, military jailing, and then deportation to Zurich. One of the things I think is really interesting here is the deterritorialization of the conflict makes it difficult to kind of put these lines in between where I'm researching and where I'm activizing. The other kind of issue we have is we have a place where fighters don't wear uniforms, right? We don't know the people that we're researching. It was Fadik Fisha. He was my neighbor. He was the father of this girl who I used to watch sometimes. I found out toward the latter end of the thing that he was the #1 commander of the Al-Aqsa Mars Brigade. People said I should have known this because he had one arm, but I didn't. I didn't know it because I didn't ask him. It wasn't really my business to ask him what he did. I knew him as the neighbor. I knew him as the guy that helped us find taxis. I knew him as the guy who had a really cute kid. So when we have asymmetric conflicts with people not wearing uniforms, we sometimes don't know who these people are. And this is actually I'll skip through this, but in 2007, he as well, he had been killed by Israeli security forces after this, but most people that I'd been interviewing who at the time were wanted terrorists, in 2007 were pardoned and became cops, most of them. Some of them became naval police, but most of them became cops. And the question is, how does the changing nature of the respondent and their illegality change the ethics of the data collection? If this person is no longer a clandestine armed fighter, and they're now a civil servant, should I not really mention the fact that 2 weeks earlier they admitted to attacking Israeli security forces, because that's in direct violation of their amnesty program. So I have knowledge which I know will get them jailed or in trouble. These are the conclusions that I had. Researchers should be concerned with social justice pedagogy, and they can and should research state security forces to use our research to criminalize dissent. Respondent agreements must be defended despite prosecution or persecution by the universities or the state in terms of judicial things. And then we need to accept the consequences for engaging in risky communities. My work in the Palestinian West Bank led to my deportation and my banning from the country. I accepted that as a responsibility. That's fine. That's what we do when we do these things. And simultaneously in Scotland, if I protect my respondents, I may lose the opportunity to graduate. I may go to jail. But if we decide to do this research, we need to acknowledge those are real possibilities and not hope they don't. We can hope they don't happen. We need to accept responsibility. And if that happens, you need to go back to your code of ethics, whatever that is for you, and make sure that that's still relevant for you, because it is relevant for the respondent. So I'm sorry, I went about a minute over. But I left my email address because usually people get angry. And this is from the anti-grand jury demonstrations, but that's what I have.
Press it and hold it. It did.
Is it on?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you both. I have a question, and I need a little help from you or someone in the audience for the name of this statute. What is the name of the statute or law that criminalizes communication with so-called the terrorist list? What is that?
The DHS exclusion list?
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I wonder if either or both of you would like to talk about that at all, as many of us could imagine possibly talking with people on that list.
Well, I know at least from the legal standpoint, it's luckily less relevant to my work, at least the work I'm doing in the States, because because to be included in that list, you have to be foreign. You have to be a foreign organization. So the Animal Liberation Front, although considered a domestic terrorist organization, is not included in the DHS terrorist exclusion list because that's specifically to regulate immigration, seizure of assets, et cetera, et cetera. So that law which says you can't talk to Al-Manar TV, you can't talk to Al-Aqsa Television, you can't talk to Town Meal Net because they support the Tigers, that law doesn't apply to the Animal Liberation Front, the Ku Klux Klan, the Army of God, the anti-abortion movements, for whatever reason. That being said, there are laws that prevent the, quote, dissemination, it's U.S. Criminal Code 18-something, the dissemination of tactical material relating to explosives, incendiaries. There's a couple other thrown in there. That has been tested and has various effects. So I can give one example. In 2003, at American University, at a conference I helped to organize, a man named Rodney Coronado spoke to who was a convicted arsonist for the Animal Liberation Front, to a room of about 300 people, said, many people come here trying to learn the tricks of the trade. I obviously can't tell you how to make incendiary devices, that would be irresponsible, but what I can do is I can read to you from my court testimony what I can do is I can read to you from the BATF's testimony. According to the Bureau of Tobacco and Firearms, Mr. Coronado purchased a 5-gallon jug and filled it with accelerant, and et cetera, et cetera. So he reads this transcript about how to make an incendiary device. He then proceeds to do this again at the University of San Diego, I think, and is prosecuted and arrested for that, but not doing the same thing at AU. Both are documented through the FBI. There's FBI agents in both audiences, and they published a transcript. He was charged under conspiracy to violate the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act, but not for the specific criminality of the speech. So I guess my response is, I don't know of any law that criminalizes talking to domestic terrorists, but I do know that if you facilitate, again, these are on quotes, if you facilitate, if you conspire, et cetera, if you facilitate or conspire to commit crimes or conceal crimes, that itself is a crime. And then if it involves incendiaries or explosives, that's a totally different set of crimes, which is federally prosecutable. And again, depending on the political nature, so if it's an animal enterprise, you can be prosecuted under the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act. If it's anti-abortion, you can be prosecuted under FACE laws, et cetera, et cetera. There's a couple politically specific laws. But outside of that, there doesn't tend to be any exclusions for domestic groups. That was a long answer.
Any more questions?
This question is for Joseph. So we have a service learning intensive that goes to Liberia every year. We take 12 students, some undergrad, some graduate students. We take them around the country, get them involved in some peace building activities. So my question to you would be, what advice do you have on keeping those students secure? We go for about a month every summer.
Well, I think the first thing to do is, because sometimes you that is taking them, you need to be aware of the culture. You need to know what's happening at that particular time, if it's election time, because that's the violence period. That you have to take very good of. Also, the kind of risk I put myself through by attending programs by non-governmental organizations with only about 8 soldiers to areas perceived to be high-risk areas, like we went to Calamu for the diamond, and then remember, if you're going to Liberia, vast area of jungle in Liberia. Until date, you need to be well informed about what's happening. As we're talking now, there's still rumors that there are rebels attacking villages or still in villages, rounding up. And I must tell you this, especially in Liberia, where I met some of the rebels, putting myself to risk. They are not satisfied yet. Some of them are still hiding. One of the main rebels, who is very intelligent, like Joe Wally, he's still not satisfied. I spoke with him. I tell him it's very risky, though, but this is to tell you that it is still very risky. And then when you're going out, because you're going out in group, you'll be easily spotted.
Oh, yeah.
Don't do that at night. If possible, don't move away from Monrovia, if possible, really. But you can't get as much information as you want if you don't take them to the remote areas. But one thing again is be aware of the culture, be able to communicate in the local language, pick out those contacts who are the real community leaders. I mean, go through the community leaders more than any other government official. Because these are the kind of people that can keep you safe in the community you are in.
Thank you.
I listened to this panel and also the conversation that preceded it. I guess what I'm coming to is the research and practice are the same. There may be two sides of the same coin. That doing the research in either of your contexts is doing practice there, is having an impact in the areas, and being self-aware of the roles you take on, both sides of it, the research and the practice role. So I guess I'm wondering if you can reflect on kind of what questions, and this goes back to my earlier question, what questions do you need to be asking yourself to be doing effective reflective practice, and how does that inform your research? So kind of the ethical questions we considered earlier. Do you have a list of, here are the questions that I carry around in my back pocket or carry around in my head? And the question that Ted raised, I just want to comment on the U.S. Patriot Act, being the act that prohibits training groups that have been labeled terrorist organizations, the international ones, prohibits training them in nonviolent methods, engaging in constructive nonviolent negotiations, trying to work for peaceful democratic change. It's illegal to teach people how to do that.
And the Patriot Act is also what maintains the DHS exclusion list. That to qualify for that, that's tied to the Patriot Act. As the Patriot Act is very large, it includes a lot of things. I can speak to what you said. The reflexive part for me is, again, this negotiation between activism and academia, as well as the negotiation between positioning oneself within the respondent community, right? So I'm interviewing respondents that come from communities that I'm familiar with. I'm interviewing respondents from communities I'm seeking to support. And I think that that's something that some people do not like, or some people find to be difficult academically. But I believe that research should have a social justice focus. I hope that a lot of people that come to SCAR believe that. I believe that research should benefit the communities that we study. We shouldn't go into random places, study random people, and give them no benefit. I think that we should and are obliged to give them some benefit. Whether that's like, building them a school in random village A, or whether that's providing contextualization and legitimacy to an often misunderstood and poorly discussed group like the Animal Liberation Front. These are very different, but I believe they're both reflexive in providing something for that community. And I think that's important if you're engaging in social justice themed research, that the respondent should get something out of it. If not them personally, I don't mean financially, of course, but if they personally don't get something out of it, their community or quote, their goal or the mission should get something out of the effort and the exposure that they're putting themselves through.
Any more questions?
This one's for Joseph. I'm curious as whether you could characterize what a good counseling or post-fieldwork counseling would look like, and have you found it, engaged in it yourself?
The main reason why I actually thought post-fieldwork counseling would be necessary was because when I visited the motherless babies' home, or the orphanages, and sometimes to the rape crisis centers, and for 2 days I couldn't sleep. I couldn't sleep for 2 days. I stopped eating. At a point, I abandoned what I was doing, and for about some other days, I spent it with the orphanages, working with them. I thought there's much I can do, almost forgetting what I was there for. And the impact it has on me was so enormous that when I came back, my supervisor was happy to see me. I was expecting that there will be maybe an internal psychologist to speak to, who will ask me what I've been through, a counselor who, knowing what I came back with when I gave them my fieldwork report, knowing I've gone through some trauma, and hoping that somebody will say this. It didn't happen. What I had to do was to now go to another faculty and I asked them what they've been doing, the education faculty, and I asked them what they've been doing, and they said they have an external psychologist who was coming in to speak to students on some issues not relating to fieldwork. So I went to her, and we spoke a lot, and I told her what I've been through. And that was what gave me the mind to say, why can't they have this within the university system? It's still non-existent yet, whereby you can walk up to the first floor of a particular building within your institution and say, okay, you're back, Joseph, the supervisor of St. Joseph, or you say, okay, this is your feedback. Go here for this help. We think you need this, or you think you need that. Sometimes you will not know your problem until somebody tells you this is what you need. Even when I came back, I was so depressed for even months before I could get myself together. So I hope that answered the question.
Thank you. Any last questions?
This question's for Michael. You're very passionate, and you seem that in your research you're very directed towards supporting a certain direction, which is very different from what we heard from Leslie Dwyer in, you shouldn't be emotional or connected, and when you are, maybe the research might not be accepted as credible. So how do you, when you are passionate, when you do care about the outcome, how do you ensure that your research will still be credible?
First, yeah, I'm not one to that. The work I did in the UK was quantitative. I mean, there was an ethnographic part of it, and I think that's the part the state was more concerned about. But one of the ways I tried to navigate that was saying, because I want to provide, let's say, ammunition for the defense of these movements, I'm going to do that through rigorous, 100% transparent, quantitative study. So one of the ways that I'm able to skirt, writing something that says, I think these people are good because, such and such, is that I do a transparent methodology, right? This is how I'm coding data. This is a decision tree about whether or not an incident is included. I included things that I personally would disagree with as the characterization. The US government characterizes Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, within this movement. I disagree 100% that he's a part of this movement, but that's the characterization. I include him in the data set. I explain why. To be transparent about it, I think is part of it, but also I think there's a place for framing. I think we are dishonest when we as anyone, I don't mean we as you, but we as we, say that we have no framing internally in these papers. We all do that. And I don't feel the need to, it's going to sound bad, I don't feel the need to apologize to the government in that sense, because it is, again, not to characterize myself in a weird way, but it is kind of a David and Goliath. The government has their venue for say. I'm not like belittling some small entity. I'm belittling the United States government, which I think has a pretty broad venue. So I think one is expressing what that viewpoint is, giving within the study of the research, what is the characterization? I'm not hiding the fact that these groups are characterized in this way. I'm being I'm trying to be very transparent about how these groups are described, but also to be rigorous about the research you're doing. The reason I eventually went forth with not publishing the work I did in Palestine was precisely for that issue. I had become too close to respondents. Most of them had been killed by the time I left. I came back, I was very, I guess PTSD is the medical term, but I was very messed up in a number of ways. And I didn't publish that research because I felt that it lacked that sort of clear division. But I think that the work I did in the UK had that. It was rigorous and transparent, and I think that's all we can do.
All right, well, now it's time to go to lunch, so you can feel free to ask more questions next door, and we will reconvene around when, Linda?
Well,